And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown.
This is Dabu7 with what is checking out to be a pretty big find here. We are talking about the cache of information that was released through FOIA pertaining to the Hillary Clinton emails. In it, there was talk of Nephilim and Gilgamesh being discovered in this. You can open up this in a PDF viewer, and you can see for yourself that this is very real, that this was in there. F2019-02110, it is there, requesting the documents pertaining to the resurrection chamber of Gilgamesh. The same Gilgamesh that I told you years ago. They found his body in Iraq, and it disappeared. They wanted to know the location of his body and the location of the buried Nephilim.
Now you can see here it says this is from Denitra Senegar. That's who it's from. This is to Hillary Clinton. Important for context. And then it says, well, you can read it there. Can you see what it says? I mean, requesting documents pertaining to the resurrection chamber of Gilgamesh, the location of his body, and the location of the buried Nephilim.
We had the opportunity in 2003 to test one of the oldest stories, if not the oldest story, of human civilization, and it's the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now, Gilgamesh is a really interesting figure. The Sumerian and Babylonian narratives speak about rulership over human beings, or kingship, as having come down from the skies. It's those who've come down from the skies who govern over human society for a long, long time, aeons and aeons. And then there comes a point where they hand over to human kings, and they somewhat recede into the background. In that story, there's a crossover king, a hybrid person called Gilgamesh. He's part sky people, part human. In April 2003, a German-led research team announced it had found King Gilgamesh's tomb. It was an incredible moment in the history of religion and archaeology. Not much more than a month after the first US invasion of Iraq under George H.W. Bush, a research team led by Jörg Fassbinder of the Bavarian Department of Historical Monuments in Munich announced the incredible discovery they had made. With scarcely contained excitement, Fassbinder spoke to the BBC and said, "The most surprising thing was that we found structures already described by the Epic of Gilgamesh. We covered more than 100 hectares. We have found garden structures and field structures just as described in the Epic. By differences in magnetization in the soil, you could look into the ground. The difference between mud bricks and sediments in the Euphrates River gives a very detailed structure. I don't want to say definitively that it was the grave of King Gilgamesh, but it looks very similar to that described in the Epic. We found, just outside the city, in the middle of the former Euphrates River, the remains of such a building as could be interpreted as a burial place." What an outstanding opportunity to test the relationship of those mythologies against scientific fact. We could DNA test the remains of that person in the tomb marked Gilgamesh. Potentially, it was one of the most significant archaeological finds in history. Once the find had been located and cordoned off, the First Iraq War ended within a matter of days.
Invasion which toppled Hussein, Astonishing discoveries were being made in Iraq, culminating in one of the most extraordinary claims anywhere for centuries, a claim which American forces have been strongly accused of confiscating, subsequently becoming the prime suspect as the driving force behind a complete suppression of these astonishing discoveries within the country. In April of 2003, Jörg Fassbinder of the Bavarian Department of Historical Monuments in Munich told the BBC's World Services Science and Action program, quote, "I don't want to say definitively that it was the grave of King Gilgamesh, but it looks very similar to that described in the epic. We found just outside the city, an area in the middle of the former Euphrates River, the remains of such a building which could be interpreted as a burial," Mr. Fassbinder said. In the book, Gilgamesh is described as having been buried under the Euphrates. He said the amazing discovery of the ancient city under the Iraqi desert had been made possible by modern technology. The most surprising thing was that we found structures already described by Gilgamesh, Mr. Fassbinder stated. "We covered more than 100 hectares. We found garden structures and field structures as described in the epic, and we found Babylonian houses. Here, predictably, is where the story goes silent. Due to conflict within the country, it was largely believed the excavations had been halted. However, it seems that the discovery of King Gilgamesh may not have been made in isolation. This footage was supposedly leaked to numerous places across the internet and has largely been put down as authentic footage of the find. Shortly after this was taken, reports state that American forces moved in and seized the find." He was the fifth king of Uruk, and his power was so mighty, many believe that the stories surrounding him are just myths that were built around his seemingly superhuman strength and endurance. However, serious scholars concluded that the story of Gilgamesh was nothing more than a fairy tale due to the astonishing story. Gilgamesh sets out on a quest to find the meaning of life and, finally, some way of defeating death. In doing so, he becomes the first epic hero in world literature. The grief of Gilgamesh and the questions his friend's death evoke resonate with every human being who has wrestled with the meaning of life in the face of death. Is this leaked footage of the tomb of Gilgamesh?
So, we pick up in Genesis, right? He confounds the languages. Now, if you look through lots of ancient Hebrew literature, you'll see that they believe that there were 70 different languages that came out of the Tower of Babel. 70 different nations. I believe Hebrew was the original language, the language of God, and I believe through Abraham, the language of Hebrew was retained. And then you got 69 other people groups speaking 69 other languages. And then you have all these people going off with different languages, 69 different languages, talking about the same guy who was their former leader, but now his character becomes known by a number of different names through different cultures. These are just a few. Gilgamesh